So, I need you to close your eyes. That is the title of this talk, but also an instruction. So, for a moment, I need you to close your eyes and think about what it is that you can see and hear and feel with your eyes closed. Can you see anything? Flickerings, maybe, on the back of your eyelids. And what can you hear? Maybe a whispering voice from someone who isn't quite there. So this is I Need You to Close Your Eyes, a talk that I did for the Fear 2000 conference, and it is about the horror of absence in the film Skinamarink and the play A Piece of Monologue. My name's Daniel Pietersen, and my social media tag is there, Pietersender, where you'll find me online in various places. So today we're going to talk about the film Skinamarink from 2022, and I think it's fair to say that Skinamarink is a divisive film. You either hate it or you dislike it. It is one of those films that I think either hits you, maybe because of experiences that you've had, or just being able to get into the film. I watched it on my own in the middle of the night. And it's terrified me, I have to say. I know some people don't find it interesting whatsoever. And you see a lot of reviews where people say it's a film where nothing happens. And that is true. That is a very accurate criticism. But for me, it's also a recommendation, because when nothing happens, that means that something strange is happening. I will talk about the film. There is very little plot, at least very little obvious plot in the film. So there is little to spoil. And I was asked before this if we need to watch the film before the talk, and I don't think so, because I'm talking about ideas that the film talks about rather than the actual film itself. But I do think if you haven't seen the film, some of the things here may take away from the kind of impact of it, if it is a film that you get into. So I hope if you haven't seen it, you do still get a chance to see it and enjoy it as much as one can. And then I'll also be talking about A Piece of Monologue, which is a play by Samuel Beckett. And Beckett is often, again, criticised for someone whose work is where nothing happens. And there's a very famous critique of Waiting for Godot, which is probably Beckett's most famous play, in that that is a play where nothing happens twice. And again, that's very accurate. It is a play of two halves, and it is a play about nothing. It's a play about waiting for a thing that never, ever happens. But a piece of monologue is, as it says, very self-descriptive term. It is a single actor working through a very monotonous piece of monologue. That again, if it's a thing that you've not seen or read as a play, I don't think this will spoil much, because it's about the acting of the play more than the actual content, as Beckett's work often is. So there will be spoilers for aspects of both of these, but I hope it won't take away from the enjoyment of them. And there are some things I kind of want to warn people about. Nothing I talk about here will be graphic. It is about ideas and concepts, but it is about loss and grief. I try and make most of my talks interesting and amusing. This is not one of those. It's quite bleak, and it is, I think, for Saturday morning, depressing. So I apologise for that ahead of time. But I don't think there is any particularly shocking or graphic, certainly not imagery. The Skinamarink itself is dark and blurred. It doesn't really evidence much. There are some jump scares in it, but they're normally audio more than visual. So we won't get any of that in the talk today. But again, I hope that it is interesting, and I hope some of the things that we'll discuss might make you think more about these two texts. And the other kind of thing I want to warn about is that this is a slightly expanded conference paper, so it won't be as long as the talks that I normally do. That might be a good thing, depending on your attitude. But the main content of today's talk is about the idea of absence. And absence has a flip side, a fairly obvious one, which is presence. So I'm going to be talking about these two concepts. And I think you could probably argue that they are the core concepts of anything. A thing is either here or not here. And there is an entire branch of philosophy called ontology, which deals with the idea of being, what it is to be and to exist. And the root question behind that is, why is there something rather than nothing. Many philosophers, Heidegger, for example, made an entire career and obsession out of this idea of why are there things and what are those things? What is it to be a thing in the world? And that is the obvious way of looking at things. There are things and there are not things. But when a thing isn't here, when absence and presence starts to fail, what does that mean? And there are, of course, things in the world that have effect and have their own impact on the world that do not exist. Hope and love and fear, all these things are not things that you can hold. You can feel them sometimes, but they aren't things in the world like a chair is, or a dog is, or a person is. And when those things come and go and ebb and flow, they have these effects. Hope dwindles into despair, and the lack of morale of a single soldier, could change the history of the world. So these things, these kind of ghostly ideas are what I'm going to be talking about. When a thing is and when a thing isn't or is no longer, what does that mean? And the first one we're going to talk about is this idea of presence and the failure and the lack of presence. And that is what Skinamarink is all about. What happens when the things that we rely on and the expectations that we have start to fail and start to corrode? Why is there nothing rather than something? And there's a lot of this kind of imagery. Skinamarink very much lingers on images of corridors, of walls, and of the small places of someone's home that we don't necessarily linger on. The critic might think that this is because of lack of budget or even lack of ideas, but I think it's making us look at these things that we don't normally look at. The corner of a room, and what happens in those corners, and what happens when those corners become filled with something that shouldn't really be there. And that's this fundamental idea, is that what I want to do and talk about is not just the lack of presence, not just, oh, there isn't a thing there, that's, why should there be a thing there? But rather the failure of presence, the failure and the collapse of expectations. And that, in Skinamarink, keeps coming up again and again and again. Things that we expect to be in a house, a toilet, a window, a parent, start to disappear. And they don't fade out of existence. That transition might make it more understandable if we saw them go. They blink. They are there, and then they are not. And that kind of almost audible pop as they disappear is one of the main, for me at least, the most frightening things in Skinamarink. This idea that something can go, that something can be taken away by a thing that we do not understand. So this idea, this kind of failure of presence and this confusion and sort of the horror of our expectations being stopped is all about, is all what Skinamarink is all about. And for me, is the most terrifying thing about it, the arbitrariness of it. This thing that we rely on, this toilet, is in this slide, is gone. And there's nothing more that you can do about it. And there's a book that I go back to a lot, which is called The Weird and the Eerie by a thinker called Mark Fisher, now sadly dead. And he talks a lot about this idea of absence and presence and these failures of these two states. And he says in his book that sometimes a disappearance can be more haunting than an apparition. So the apparition of a ghost or a monster, some kind of thing, is scary. We don't expect things to lunge out of the darkness or simply manifest from behind a tree. But a disappearance is more haunting. It kind of tugs at us and it makes us question the reality that sits around us. And he says that's because absence doesn't just repel, but it also compels. It makes us go back. We look, a thing has disappeared, and we double take. We think, what? Is it the world that is wrong? Or is it me that is wrong? Do I misremember? Did I not experience that in the way that I thought I did? And that's kind of compounded by another thinker, philosopher Caroline Korsmeyer, and she has a book called Fear and Disgust, The Sublime and the Sublate, where she talks about this idea of the sublime, so a thing that kind of attracts us, even though we maybe fear it or we're in awe of it. And this idea that she has of the sublate, a thing that is so vile that we can't help but keep going back to it. It confounds our ideas of what nice and nasty might well be. And she has this phrase, which I really like, and she says that the sublate, the idea of something so repellent that it attracts us, is aversion with a backward glance, lingering over and even savouring its object. And she talks about things like a missing tooth and how our tongue just kind of finds its way back to the hole where the tooth used to be. And these things of wanting to look back at terrifying, horrible things, whether that's an explosion or whether it's a lost loved one dwindling off into the underworld. And we see stories about that again and again, people being distracted by the thing that they should be disgusted by. And then in Skinamarink, I think that's this idea. It's so wrong that the things in the house start to disappear that it becomes compelling and attractive. And I found that watching the film. I found that I was just staring at the screen, waiting for whatever thing disappeared next. And it's small things to start with, little ideas that sort of pop away. That toilet, when that disappears, that's quite a big moment. And then windows start to disappear. And a window is itself a disappearance. It is a hole in a wall. So when a hole disappears, that leaves more than it should be. And that is weird. That is a very strange idea. And then other things start to disappear in the house of Skinamarink, this haunted house where things just go and never return. And the idea of Skinamarink, it is a first person perspective. You are always staring out, almost always unblinking, from the perspective of a child. And the children, when there is small amounts of dialogue, question things. Where did it go? Where do you think Dad is? Why is this happening? And the voices are garbled, shrill, child's voices that as an adult you kind of find it hard to understand. But there are other voices that manifest only as the subtitles. There are strange gurglings and raspings and whisperings, which suddenly appear as perfectly intelligible text on the screen. And there is one moment in the film, a very small moment, that genuinely still terrifies me, when a whispering hiss comes out of the kind of fog of the screen, and the subtitles say, "Come upstairs." And the film camera just stares out the stairs and looks at this black hole at the top of it. There's nothing there. There's nothing to frighten you, but the idea of what might be there and what might go when you go upstairs still gives me the shivers even now. And that, I think, because I talk a lot about haunted houses and various spaces that have strange manifestations and experiences within them. And I think ultimately, as many definitions of haunting as you can get, haunting is about lingering. Either the ghost lingers, can't go to wherever it is it's meant to go, or we linger in the space. Why do we go to haunted houses? Why do we watch films about haunted houses? Because we like to linger in these strange spaces and environments. And it's this returning to, this compelled, like Korsmeyer says, this idea that we keep going back to the idea of a haunted house. And when we think about it, a house where nobody lives, filled with ghosts that want to hurt us or want to frighten us, it's not a place you would think of returning to. But we do, again and again and again. We go back to these places in this act of repetition. And a ghost is a repetition, even in its metaphorical sense. We say that there are ghosts of things, there are echoes, and an echo comes back again and again and again. And we see this in Skinamarink. We see the same corridors. It's not a large house. It's not a rambling manor house of a classic horror story. It's a standard North American house that you could probably see anywhere. It is very similar in many ways to the house from Poltergeist, and that might be intentional. It might not be. But we see these blank corridors. They're not baroque. They're not filled with shadows of gargoyles and grandfather clocks. They are simple, largely unadorned buildings, rooms and spaces. Carpeted, there's a nightlight there. In any other sense, it would probably be quite a pleasant family home. But it isn't, because these ideas of absence. A home is different from a house because a home is filled with things. It is filled with people. It is filled with emotions. It's filled, hopefully, pleasant emotions. And it is filled with all the accoutrement of people living, souvenirs and toys and gifts and posters and all those kind of things, where this house is not. And we start to think, why is this? A family home with two children, but there is nothing there really, some scattered toys, but they start to disappear eventually. And we have this then this idea, this inexplicability. And I think when people say that nothing happens in Skinamarink, I don't want to say it's not because they don't understand it. It's because it's not understandable. And if you don't like that or you don't get into that, and I do think it is a boring film largely. If that kind of thing doesn't frighten you or at least interest you, then you know you will not get much out of it. But these questions: where did it go? Why did it go? And what remains left behind? Those are very haunting questions. We don't get an answer to them. And probably one of the largest spoilers of Skinamarink is that it simply ends. There isn't really any resolution. That inexplicability still hangs on and it haunts us, still haunts me. I watched the film a couple of times. There are sections that still do genuinely, I have to say, terrify me. And I am not that frightenable by a lot of horror films. Certainly once the monster pops out of a closet, I tend to lose interest. But in Skinamarink, that never happens. So the tongue of my film watching body still lingers around that tooth that went long ago. And there is this idea, like I said, these toys, these things that we think are, they lie around and they sit with us and they fill up this space. They just disappear. They blink out in a second like that. And if you can imagine, I think, put yourself not as an adult film goer, horror enjoyer, but as a child, if one of your toys simply disappeared, that would be very, very traumatic, I think, especially if you didn't understand. If it hadn't been taken away, you didn't know where it had gone, one of your parts of you has been lost. And Mark Fisher, again, to go back to his thought, he has this phrase and he says, their disappearance, the things around us, when things disappear, they leave haunted gaps. They don't just go and then something, the air, some ether goes in to fill the space that they once left. They leave gaps. And those gaps, like a tooth that's gone missing, still impact us and still leave memories of us. And when things start to fail, when the presence of things start to fail, reality then gets kind of pockmarked with all of these gaps. We know that there was a thing there once, a thing we maybe cared for very deeply, but it is no longer there. But the no longer there-ness of it still affects us, still haunts us. And we can say that these acts of haunting by these failed presences are memory. We remember things that are no longer there. Some things have simply gone. Some things may never come back, but we remember them. And they still live on and still impact us in our minds. And that then has an impact upon the world. But we can also call it trauma. The things that have happened to us still happen to us and still carry on happening to us as long as they sit in our minds. And some of those things are not good. And this phrase here is not a child talking, or at least we believe not a child talking. It is one of the things, the presences that are in the house of Skinamarink. And Skinamarink is about toilets disappearing, about windows disappearing, about toys disappearing, but it's about more subtle things disappearing. It's about love and safety and agency disappearing. And these things are happening to small children. And you put yourself in this worldview, this point of view, the camera is low, you start to realize. Quite late in the film, for me at least, you feel small. The furniture that still exists in the house looks large to you, and the toys look quite brighter than all the other things in the world. But that starts to fade. And this is, to me, is the most affecting part of the film. There is no immediate physical threat, but there is this constant, lingering, existential dread, to the extent that even one of the children's mouths is taken away. She can no longer speak, she can no longer express herself. And the implications of that in the House of Skinamarink, I think, are frightening, and horrible. So in Skinamarink, nothing happens, but sometimes nothing happening is far worse than something happening. And we'll move on now to the idea of absence, of this failed absence. We've had failed presences, things that should be there but are not there. And now we'll look at things that aren't there but still kind of are. And in this, I'll talk about a piece of Monologue, a play from Samuel Beckett from 1979. I think one of his perhaps well-known pieces, not his most famous, but it is one that I love. The text is one thing, but the performance of it, a single actor going through these terse, sparse lines that say so much in typical Beckett style, so few words and without any florid adjectives or description. And to give you an idea of that, if you don't know Beckett's work, and I'm far from an expert, so I just enjoy a lot of his stuff, we have this piece of text here, which says, curtain, faint, diffuse light. Speaker stands well off centre, downstage audience left. White hair, white nightgown, white socks. 2 meters to his left, same level, same height, standard lamp, skull side, white globe, faintly lit. Just visible, extreme right, same level, white foot of pallet bed. 10 seconds before speech begins. 30 seconds before end of speech, lamp light begins to fail. Lamp out, silence, speaker, globe, foot of pallet barely visible in diffuse light. 10 seconds, curtain. And this is not the play. This is the stage directions for the play. So this gives you an idea of Beckett's kind of style, very stern, staccato ideas and speech patterns. There are things missing in this. There is grammar missing in this. There are words that you would expect. And there are holes between the words, which can be filled with things, or they can be left empty. And I think when they're left empty, that's when Beckett's work really comes to the fore. And a piece of Monologue is a stage play, but you can, there is a very good version from a box set of Beckett plays, a filmed version, on YouTube. So if you go to YouTube and look for a piece of Monologue, you'll see this version. It's the version I'm using for the talk. It is a single actor, this old man in his nightshirt, and a wall. And he says, blank wall, so nightly, up, socks, nightgown, window, lamp. Nothing on the wall now but the pins, covered with pictures once, pictures of, he all but said, of loved ones. Nowhere to be heard, anywhere. Room once full of sounds, faint sounds, none now, no such thing as none. And that's kind of an obsession of Beckett's, I think. The idea of spaces that appear to be empty, ideas, people's lives that appear to be empty, but they are not. They are filled with things that have gone. Memories, old loved ones, old ideas, failed ambitions and regrets. Beckett is not a cheerful writer, but he is often a very funny writer for various levels of senses of humour. So he says that this room, which in his descriptions is blank, empty, lit only by a small skull-shaped lamp, is filled with things that once were there. The actor, known only as Speaker in the actual text of the play, talks about not only pictures of people that have gone, but the pictures have gone. The pins remain, that little fragment of a picture, I imagine, that's been ripped away off the wall. And that the strange ghost of the picture on the wallpaper still remain. All those things still remain. And they are failed absences. The picture is gone, but it still lingers. He still remembers it. He still remembers the things that it is a picture of. He still remembers those experiences and those ideas and the sadness that it fills him with. And this is another form of the same haunting, a thing which was there, which has disappeared, but it still remains. Its ghost its skeletal fragments still remain. Some way you could argue that the little snip of a picture that hangs on the pin is more impactful than the picture itself. The picture still exists in speaker's mind, but the fact that he has at some point ripped it off the wall in some fit of emotion changes it, makes it more than simply just a picture. And he says, nothing stirring, faintly stirring. How does nothing stir? How does nothing happen? And when it does stir, it stirs faintly. And we have to listen to hear it. We could simply ignore these things. We could always ignore ghosts and ignore these hauntings, but we choose not to. Again, as Korsmar says, we return back to them, we glance back at them. And the more faint they stir, the more hard, the more we strain to hear them, to see them. 30,000 nights of ghosts beyond, beyond that black beyond. Talks about the length of his life and the idea of nights, ghosts of nights. He's sitting up at night, staring at the wall, recounting these words, which it's implied he has done many, many times before, perhaps 30,000 times. And beyond that black beyond, beyond the darkness, there is nothing, but that nothing still waits for us. Ghost light, ghost nights, ghost rooms, ghost graves. A ghost grave, what an image that is, and who would lie within it. Ghost, he all but said ghost loved ones. He returns this phrase, almost catching in his throat the idea of loved ones. Loved ones in the past tense. Those, are they the people who the pictures are of? Or are they something else? Something that sits behind him in the darkness? Perhaps more alive than he is himself, going through this repetition. He becomes a ghost, much more than those who have died beforehand. And Beckett uses these absences, these ghosts that linger, these little snips of paper that still are attached to the wall, the shadows cast by this skull-sized lamp, to explore grief. This old man, you get the idea that he's thinking of things that have happened many years ago, not just recently, not just his wife maybe who died last week. These are horrors and memories that he's had over years and years and years. So these absences have filled up his life. They have become his life. Maybe this ritual that he goes through every night is more than his actual daily life, which we see nothing of. And we never do see any ideas of who he is beyond these ideas, these repetitious ideas that he has and obsessions. And this comes then back to Skinamarink, these ideas of this grief, this loss. And we get this voice when one of the children asks the other, are you hiding? They aren't hiding, they've simply gone. They are lost into the void. So Skinamarink, I think, uses these ideas of failed presences, things that once were, that we probably relied on and expected to be there, which have gone, and leaves us without this kind of support, and it makes us stumble. And it burdens us with ideas of trauma. It implies very much that something terrible has happened or is happening in the house of Skinamarink. You can see there that fluid on the door. Is it blood? That appears and disappears strangely throughout the film, and we never get any explanation for it. And an explanation, I think, would be disappointing in a strange way, not having it explained. The presence of an explanation failing is very much exactly what the film is about. And a piece of monologue, I think, uses these failed absences to manifest as grief. Things that won't go away, these ideas and these memories and these things that we've gone through just won't leave us, like a ghost sort of sitting behind us, looking over our shoulder. And this grief, if we don't let those things go, we don't find a way for them to go, will manifest as grief. And again, this idea of haunting as this act of lingering, of returning to, of repetition. Both Skinamarink and Piece of Monologue use the same things again and again. Repeated phrases, repeated scenes and repeated viewpoints. We force to look at these things. In Skinamarink, we are the point of view camera, and A Piece of Monologue, we can't help but stare at this tiny room, even sometimes intentionally performed on a large stage, but the actual space of it is very, very small. And I think hauntingly, to use a pun, we are never free of ghosts. Ghosts are all around us. Ghosts are inside us, in our memories and our ideas and ourselves in many ways. We are a ghost that sits inside staring out of a skull. We are indeed the ghosts. And with that, on this sunny Saturday morning, I will ask you again to close your eyes and go to sleep and think of the nothingness that there is out there. Thank you very much.